An excerpt from Night by Elie Wiesel. The barrack we had been assigned to was very long. On the roof, a few bluish skylights. I thought, this is what the antechamber of hell must look like. So many crazed men, so much shouting, so much brutality. Dozens of inmates were there to receive us, sticks in hand, striking anywhere, anyone without reason. The orders came. Strip! Hurry up! Rouse! Hold on only to your belt and your shoes. Our clothes were to be thrown on the floor at the back of the barrack. There was a pile there already. New suits, old ones, torn overcoats, rags. For us, it meant true equality, nakedness. We trembled in the cold. A few SS officers wandered through the room looking for strong men. If vigor was that appreciated, perhaps one should try to appear sturdy. My father thought the opposite. Better not to draw attention. We later found out that he had been right. Those who were selected that day were incorporated into the Sonderkommando, the commando working in the crematoria. Bela Katz, the son of an important merchant of my town, had arrived in Birkenau with the first transport 1 week ahead of us. When he found out that we were there, he succeeded in slipping us a note. He told us that having been chosen because of his strength, he had been forced to place his own father's body into the furnace. The blows continued to rain on us. To the barber! Belt and shoes in hand, I let myself be dragged along to the barber's. Their clippers tore out our hair, shaved every hair on our bodies. My head was buzzing, the same thought surfacing over and over, not to be separated from my father. Freed from the barber's clutches, we began to wander about the crowd, finding friends, acquaintances. Every encounter filled us with joy. Yes, joy. Thank God, you are still alive. Some were crying. They used whatever strength that they had left to cry. Why had they let themselves be brought here? Why didn't they die in their beds? Their words were interspersed with sobs. Suddenly, someone threw his arms around me in a hug. Yehiel, the Sider Rebe's brother. He was weeping bitterly, and I thought he was crying with joy at still being alive. Don't cry, Yehiel, I said. Don't waste your tears. Not cry. We are on the threshold of death. Soon we shall be inside. Do you understand? Inside. How could I not cry? I watched darkness fade through the bluish skylights in the roof. I no longer was afraid. I was overcome by fatigue. The absent no longer entered our thoughts. One spoke of them. Who knows what happened to them? But their fate was not on our minds. We were incapable of thinking. Our senses were numbed, and everything was fading into a fog. We no longer clung to anything. The instincts of self-preservation, of self-defense, of pride had all deserted us. In one terrifying moment of lucidity, I thought of us as damned souls wandering through the void, souls condemned to wander through space until the end of time, seeking redemption, seeking oblivion, without any hope of finding either. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, we were expelled from the barrack. The capos were beating us again, but I no longer felt the pain. A glacial wind was enveloping us. We were naked, holding our shoes and belts. An order, run, and we ran. After a few minutes of running, a new barrack. A barrel full of foul-smelling liquid stood by the door. Disinfection, everybody soaked in it, and then came a hot shower. All very fast. As we left the showers, we were chased outside and ordered to run some more. Another barrack, the storeroom, very long tables, mountains of prison garb. As we ran, they threw the clothes at us, pants, jackets, shirts. In a few seconds, we had ceased to be men. Had the situation not been so tragic, we might have laughed. We looked pretty strange. Mere Katz, a colossus, wore a child's pants, and Stern, a skinny little fellow, was floundering in a huge jacket. We immediately started to switch. I glanced over at my father. How changed he looked! His eyes were veiled. I wanted to tell him something, but I didn't know what. The night had passed completely. The morning stars shone in the sky. I, too, had become a different person. The student of Talmud, the child that I was, had been consumed by the flames. All that was left was a shape that resembled me. My soul had been invaded and devoured by a black flame. So many events had taken place in just a few hours that I had completely lost all notion of time. When had we left our homes? And the ghetto? And the train? Only a week ago? One night? One single night? How long had we been standing in the freezing wind? 1 hour? A single hour? 60 minutes? Surely it was a dream. Not far from us, prisoners were at work. Some were digging holes, others were carrying sand. None as much as glanced at us. We were withered trees in the heart of the desert. Behind me, people were talking. I had no desire to listen to what they were saying or to know who was speaking and what about. Nobody dared raise his voice, even though there was no guard around. We whispered, perhaps because of the thick smoke that poisoned the air and stung the throat. We were herded into yet another barrack inside the gypsy camp, and we fell into ranks of 5. Now, stop moving. There was no floor, a roof and 4 walls. Our feet sank into the mud. Again, the waiting. I fell asleep standing up. I dreamed of a bed, of my mother's hand on my face. I woke, I was standing, my feet in the mud. Some people collapsed, sliding into the mud, and others shouted, "Are you crazy? We were told to stand. Do you want to get us all in trouble?" As if all the troubles in the world were not already upon us. Little by little, we all sat down in the mud, but we had to get up whenever a capo came in to check if, by chance, somebody had a new pair of shoes. If so, we had to hand them over. No use protesting. The blows multiplied, and in the end, one still had to hand them over. I had new shoes myself, but as they were covered with a thick coat of mud, they had not been noticed. I thanked God in an improvised prayer for having created mud in his infinite and wondrous universe. Suddenly, the silence became more oppressive. An SS officer had come in, and with him, the smell of the angel of death. We stared at his fleshy lips. He harangued us from the center of the barrack. "You are in a concentration camp, in Auschwitz." A pause. He was observing the effect his words had produced. His face remains in my memory to this day. A tall man in his 30s, crime written all over his forehead and his gaze. He looked at us as one would a pack of leprous dogs clinging to life. "Remember," he went on. "Remember it always and let it be graven in your memories. You are in Auschwitz, and Auschwitz is not a convalescent home. It is a concentration camp. Here, you must work. If you don't, you will go straight to the chimney, to the crematorium. Work or crematorium. The choice is yours." We had already lived through a lot that night. We thought that nothing could frighten us anymore, but his harsh words sent shivers through us. The word chimney here was not an abstraction. It floated in the air, mingled with the smoke. It was perhaps the only word that had real meaning in this place. He left the barrack, and the capos arrived shouting, "All specialists, locksmiths, carpenters, electricians, watchmakers, one step forward." The rest of us were transferred to yet another barrack, this one of stone. We had permission to sit down. A gypsy inmate was in charge. My father suddenly had a colic attack. He got up and asked politely in German, "Excuse me, could you tell me where the toilets are located?" The gypsy stared at him for a long time from head to toe, as if he wished to ascertain that the person addressing him was actually a creature of flesh and bone, a human being with a body and a belly. And then, as if waking for a deep sleep, he slapped my father with such force that he fell down and crawled back to his place on all fours. I stood petrified. What had happened to me? My father had just been struck in front of me, and I had not even blinked. I had watched and kept silent. Only yesterday I would have dug my nails into this criminal's flesh. Had I changed that much? So fast? Remorse began to gnaw at me. All I could think was, I shall never forgive them for this. My father must have guessed my thoughts because he whispered in my ear, "It doesn't hurt." His cheek still bore the red mark of the hand. Everybody outside. A dozen or so gypsies had come to join our guard. Their clubs and whips were cracking around me. My feet were running on their own, and I tried to protect myself from the blows by hiding behind others. It was spring, and the sun was shining. Fall in, 5 by 5. The prisoners I had glimpsed that morning were working nearby. No guard in sight, only the chimney's shadow. Lulled by the sunshine in my dreams, I felt someone pulling at my sleeve. It was my father. "Come on, son." We marched. Gates opened and closed. We continued to march between the barbed wire. At every step, white signs with black skulls looked down at us. The inscription, "Warning, danger of death." What irony. Was there here a single place where one was not in danger of death? The gypsies had stopped next to a barrack. They were replaced by SS men who encircled us with machine guns and police dogs. The march had lasted half an hour. Looking around me, I noticed that the barbed wire was behind us. We had left the camp. It was a beautiful day in May, and the fragrances of spring were in the air. The sun was setting. But no sooner had we taken a few more steps than we saw the barbed wire of another camp. This one had an iron gate with the overhead inscription, "Arbeit macht frei." Work makes you free. Auschwitz. First impression, better than Birkenau. Cement buildings with 2 stories rather than wooden barracks. Little gardens here and there. We were led towards one of those blocks. Seated on the ground by the entrance, we began to wait again. From time to time, somebody was allowed to go in. These were the showers, a compulsory routine. Going from one camp to the other several times a day, we had each time to go through them. After the hot shower, we stood shivering in the darkness. Our clothes had been left behind. We had been promised other clothes. Around midnight, we were told to run. "Faster," yelled our guards. "The faster you run, the faster you'll get to go to sleep." After a few minutes of racing madly, we came to a new block. The man in charge was waiting. He was a young Pole who was smiling at us. He began to talk to us, and despite our weariness, we listened attentively. "Comrades, you are now in the concentration camp Auschwitz. Ahead of you lies a long road paved with suffering. Don't lose hope. You have already eluded the worst danger, the selection. Therefore, you must muster your strength and keep your faith. We shall all see the day of liberation. Have faith in life, 1,000 times faith. By driving out despair, you will move away from death. Hell does not last forever." And now here's a prayer, or rather, a piece of advice. Let there be camaraderie among you. We are all brothers and share the same fate. The same smoke hovers over all our heads. Help each other. That is the only way to survive. And now, enough said. You are tired. Listen, you are in Block 17, and I am responsible for keeping order here. Anyone with a complaint may come and see me. That is all. Go to sleep. 2 people to a bunk. Good night. Those were the first human words. No sooner had we climbed into our bunks than we fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, a veteran inmates treated us without brutality. We went to wash. We were given new clothing. They brought us black coffee. We left the block around 10 o'clock so it could be cleaned. Outside, the sun warmed us. Our morale was much improved. A good night's sleep had done its work. Friends met, exchanged a few sentences. We spoke of everything without ever mentioning those who had disappeared. The prevailing opinion was that the war was about to end. At about noon, we were brought some soup, 1 bowl of thick soup for each of us. I was terribly hungry, yet I refused to touch it. I was still the spoiled child of long ago. My father swallowed my ration. We then had a short nap in the shade of the block. That SS officer in the muddy barrack must have been lying. Auschwitz was, after all, a convalescent home. In the afternoon, they made us line up. 3 prisoners brought a table and some medical instruments. We were told to roll up our left sleeves and file past the table. The 3 veteran prisoners, needles in hand, tattooed numbers on our left arms. I became A7713. From then on, I had no other name. At dusk, a roll call. The work commandos had returned. The orchestra played military marches near the camp entrance. Tens of thousands of inmates stood in rows while the SS checked their numbers. After the roll call, the prisoners from the blocks disappeared, looking for friends, relatives, or neighbors among the arrivals of the latest convoy.